Hello, good evening and welcome to Budget Model Railways. So we're back to the idea of making layouts that will go on my motorbike. Now some of you who follow me closely will know I used to have a motorbike with a top box and I did a nice layout that fitted the top box. However, that bike's gone. I've got a Royal Enfield 350 Meteor now. Very nice, bit more capable, but it's only got saddlebags. And so I needed a way of carrying a layout that's going to be in a waterproof case and it's going to take a bit of knocking around. And Doug happened to have this. Now, please stay with me with this video because there's quite a lot to cover. There's quite a lot of challenges I've had to do it into this space, which I hope people will find interesting. And then at the end, I'll try and do some shunting on it. And I've also got a news on one of my layouts. So here we go. This is what I came up with. So this box is... well, it's basically 11 inches by 9 inches by 4 inches tall. So that's quite constraining to start with. But it's weatherproof, it's hard, it'll sit inside my saddlebag. And that's what I've managed to do in there, is fit a two-part shunting layout in. Now what I didn't want to do is the classic oval. I really admire the people that do these oval layouts in small cases, but I want to be able to do this operationally. I want to be able to actually run trains. So I've got two parts in here. We take the little fiddle yard out first, like that, and then this part lifts out. That's the goods yard and station module, if you like. And then we've got the scenic module there. And the little bit of foam board in the bottom there is to lift them because there's a curved edge on the top and the bottom. So this again was one of the challenges of designing it, because you think you've got a box this size, and then of course you find you haven't got quite as much height as you thought, unless you want to make the baseboard smaller. So that was the box. Now there is a certain amount of serendipity sometimes to doing these layouts, and in this case is obviously I had to have the join after the point, and by sheer good fortune half the length is one ST11 straight and 1 point. So that was very fortunate. And the scenic module was two ST3 curves and an ST1 straight long. So that was very fortunate that they just gelled. The base itself is simply a bit of old bookcase that I think came from my mum's. So it's pretty old. It shouldn't warp or weft or anything now. But that obviously took some of the height, giving me quite a low back seam. Now, you'll also have noticed that inside the box, it's got a curved edge. So the back of the layout has got to be curved to fit into the box. And it also means that you get a bit of a V there, which I've hidden with trees. So there was really sort of challenges all the way along. Nice little photo back scene. Because it's so small, I managed to actually do it for some offcuts I had lying around, which has worked quite well. I've managed to get a little station in. It's just a little halt there, so I can run a rail bus in and out. And I've got a good siding. I've repeated the idea of using the Hornby point motor shed as a larger building in N-gauge, which I think works quite well. And I've got an Outland Models covered area there and a 3D printed from Doug container. So it's not too crammed. I'm quite pleased with it. It's got the catenary masts because I wanted the idea of being able to run the Kato pocket line loco. Buffers have obviously got to be very flat. That one's actually cut into a corner because I don't have much room. Now what I didn't want to do on the scenic side was do the obvious, just flatten grass. So we've actually got what's now becoming a bit of a classic for me, which is the overbridge, and then the road runs down into the good yard. And it's just usual ballast scatter there, grass on it, cardboard painted black, painted grey, and then black washed and dry brushed. But even the truck's stuck on. I managed to find some very low trees that would fit in there. So that's quite a nice scenic thing. And then we've got to look about how we're going to join it together. So this is where it gets a little bit interesting. I didn't want a lot of wiring, so we're simply going to I've got a spare bag of fish plates, and you'll see what the little bits of rod are for in a minute. So the fish plates can't stay on this one because there simply isn't the length, so they go on separately. And then I wanted a way of lining the boards up. And so really simple. I haven't got any dowels or anything around. Bit of old pencil, some masking tape to make it fit. And then that goes in a hole each side. Push them together. And that then gives me a little bit more rigidity. It's not going to move when we're going around. Now, interestingly, the other board's a little bit longer. So at the other end, I can leave the fish plates on. And it should then just line up. This one is proving to be a little bit fiddlier, actually. I'm not quite sure why. And there we go. That's the fiddle yard then fixed on there. I've got to sort the wires out. They're proving a little bit problematic, just to tuck them out of the way. So we can then just put our power in here. That was all fairly straightforward. Gives me a nice looking layout, in fact. Now it's what I believe the Americans call a tuning fork layout, which is just one siding, but using a card system, very similar to what you would use on an inglenook. Actually, there's enough shunting there to make it interesting. And you've got to remember this is in a box, 11 inches by 9 inches. Now where it got a bit interesting actually was the controller. Because, I'm just going to have to move the camera angle slightly. I realised I wanted an integral controller. The problem with having a separate one is this slides on the whatever bench you're on. And it gets a bit fiddly. You've got to hold the controller. But obviously there's absolutely no room there to get our usual single controller in. Big box. Simply no room. I occasionally suffer with a bit of insomnia. And the other night when I couldn't sleep, I came up with an idea and I didn't know if it would work. So in the morning I came down and I took all the components out. And basically what I've able to do is find room to put the forward and backwards switch on the road, tucked in that tiny little gap. Now that also has the advantage of pushing down rather than on, it stops it sliding. And then the power part sits there. That got very interesting. I had to cut away foam board, chisel out timber, and do all sorts of things to make that fit. Fortunately, you can basically with these controllers set the speed you want and leave it. So it doesn't really matter that that's a bit fiddly to get to. But it means that you've got an integral controller in a layout that's that small. So there we go. And it's worked so far. It's been a really interesting project to have those sort of challenges. You know, I've got to curve the edges and make it fit, but I've still ended up with what in essence is quite a nice little layout. And then I've got this, which is a little plastic box I found. It only takes 8 wagons, the layout. Made a little card insert, and I've got my wagons in there as well then, all easy to transport. And the Kato Pocket Line loco comes in its own secure little box, so that's easy for transport. And if I wanted to run some passenger services upwards, backwards and forwards, then obviously the Kato tram will look really good. And that again comes in its own transportable box. I'm just going to tuck those wires out of the way a bit. So let's put some wagons on and show it in use. So I've got my cards there for the order that I want. Put my glasses down. Usual proviso here, I'm afraid, that I'm not the way round I would normally be. I would normally be sat. Oh, now this is where I've got to debug it a little. That tree is in the way. So I can basically shunt this backwards and forwards a bit now. So I want that in there. Don't think that's quite caught. So I did say this when I did one of my videos, that everything works fine right up until the point you start filming. And actually that's one of the wagons I need to remove because that shell wagon doesn't run particularly well. But we can shunt backwards and forwards. got something stopping that. Oh, there we go. Don't know what that was. Haven't debugged this yet. Actually, that was rather an easy one because the only thing I've actually got to move is that and that. I do need to move that tree. I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to pull that tree out and move that later. It's running slightly quicker. I'm just going to turn it down a little. That's typical. Wagons are not wanting to work today. And then that goes off and we can run it back in again. Leave some wagons here. Take that off. And then we can take those off. And we can run a little passenger service in. And that can wait at the station. So, not a great deal to do, but I was out here when I could typically work fine the other day when I wasn't filming it, half an hour or so shunting away. It's quite a nice little scene. I'm quite pleased with the quality of it. It looks a good enough standard really for what it is, given how small it is, and I can have a bit of fun with that, just running things backwards and forwards. And it'd be quite nice. I'd take it to something on Friday to the club night. And it's worth remembering to say that as a layout, it's in that tiny little box. So I'll give you a little guided tour actually. So this is my late father's desk. This was my dad's desk. When he retired, he was allowed to take it with him. And when my mum sadly passed away a couple of years ago, I inherited it. Particularly good. It's got pull-out writing things, but they're very good for tea. So this is what all my layouts are made on. This is my workbench. It's getting a bit patinaed. Apart from anything my father did with paint and stuff, which is quite nice. And over the back there is that layout, which some of you have seen is actually up for sale now as well. So there we go. I think that's an interesting little layout, given that it comes in this tiny little box. And it's quite practical. I say, as soon as I started filming, of course, things went wrong. But I was running the other night as a test, and it was pretty good. So I will be getting back on with the Japanese layout soon. I've got my building stashed there, ready to go. Now the eagle-eyed there, that black sign there that says Mr. M. Potter Manager, that was my sign when I first started in retail management back in the 1980s. And I've always kept it with me. And in fact, sat there. When my father had finished with model railways when I was little, he went on to doing all sorts of things. But one of the things he did was painting military figures. And that's one of his. And that lived on my desk when I was the Colonel, Commandant, Surrey Army Cadet Force. My dad was very keen on the military, done his national service. Sadly, he didn't get to see me being commissioned, let alone a colonel. But I'm sure he would have been chuffed. So I had that on my desk. And it now lives on my middle desk now that I've retired from doing cadets. So there we go. Interesting layout. Be interested to know what you think of that. And speak to you again soon.